Welcome back, my loves. I'm so glad you're here. Today's story is about Karen, a woman who spent years building a version of herself that was safe, reliable, contained. She had the right job, the right apartment, the right answer for every question life asked her. What she didn't have, what she had never let herself have, was Fabi. Fabi, her CEO. The woman who ran the company Karen had given 7 years of her life to. The woman who was brilliant and demanding and impossible to read, and who, one afternoon, called Karen into her office and asked about a letter. A letter Karen had written 3 years ago and never sent. Or so she thought. This is a story about what happens when the thing you buried most carefully is exactly what someone else needed to find. It's about the weight of silence, the cost of safety, and the terrifying moment when the woman you've spent years trying not to want looks you in the eye and tells you she kept it. Stay with me until the end. I promise. This one will stay with you. I found it on a Tuesday. I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't looking for anything, really. Just going through the storage cabinet in the corner of my office, the one that collects everything a person is too busy to file and too guilty to throw away. Old contracts. Expired insurance documents. A birthday card from my former assistant, Claire, who left 2 years ago and whose handwriting I still recognized immediately. And then, at the very back of the third drawer, tucked inside a manila folder with nothing written on the tab, a single envelope. Cream-colored. Slightly worn at the edges like it had been handled more than once. My handwriting on the front. Fabi. Just that. No last name. No title. Just her name. In my handwriting. From 3 years ago. When I had been stupid enough to write down everything I wasn't supposed to feel. I stood there for a long time with that envelope in my hands. It was still sealed. Let me tell you about the woman I was before Fabi changed the shape of everything. I was good at my job. Really good. I had climbed from junior project coordinator to director of operations in 5 years, which at Hargrove and Stratton meant something. It meant late nights and impossible deadlines and learning to read a room so fast you could tell who was about to explode before they even opened their mouth. I was precise. I was organized. I never missed a detail. I also never let anyone too close. It wasn't something I had decided. It wasn't a resolution or a strategy. It was just the life I had settled into, quietly, without naming it. I had my routines, my apartment in Lincoln Park, all clean lines and neutral colors, the kind of space that looks curated in photographs and feels a little like a hotel if you live there long enough. My Thursday dinners with my college friend Meg, who was loud and warm and always trying to fix me up with someone new. My Sunday runs along the lakefront that I never missed, regardless of weather, because the discipline was the point. I had built a life that fit me perfectly. The problem was that I wasn't sure it fit the person I actually was. I just hadn't examined that too closely. Fabi arrived at Hargrove and Stratton 14 months after I did. She came in as the new CEO after the previous one retired. Quietly, without the announcement or the all-hands meeting that should have preceded her. One Monday morning she was simply there, in the corner office, with the door open. I had been warned about her. My colleague Diana, who had been at the company twice as long as I had, and knew everything about everyone, sat across from me at lunch that day, and said, with the calm certainty of someone delivering weather forecasts, "She's not going to be easy." Diana was wrong. Easy would have been better. Easy I could have handled. Fabi was precise in a way that made my own precision feel amateur. She asked questions no one had thought to ask. She had a way of sitting in a meeting, very still, just listening, that made people uncomfortable in ways they couldn't articulate, because she wasn't being hostile. She was just completely present, and most people weren't used to being seen that clearly. I noticed it the first time she turned that attention on me. It was during a quarterly review, 3 months into her tenure. I was presenting the operational restructuring proposal I'd been working on for 6 weeks. I had rehearsed it. I had the numbers cold, the timeline mapped, every counter-argument preempted. I was ready. She let me finish. Then she was quiet for a moment. "Walk me through what you cut," she said. "Not what I kept, what I cut." I did. I walked her through every decision I'd made and every option I'd eliminated, and she listened to all of it without interrupting, and then she said, "You made the right calls. But the next time you present something like this, don't over-prepare the defense. It makes people think you're not sure." I sat with that for days, because she was right. And because the fact that she was right, the fact that she had looked at my work and seen not just the work, but the anxiety underneath it, had unnerved me in a way I didn't have a clean name for. That was the beginning. I didn't know it then. I told myself it was professional admiration, respect. The reasonable recognition that this woman was exceptionally good at what she did, and that proximity to exceptional people tended to make you better. That was true. It was also almost entirely not the point. Over the months that followed, I came to know Fabi the way you come to know someone you work closely with, in increments, in the texture of daily details. I learned that she arrived at the office before almost everyone else, but she was never the last to leave. She had a hard stop at 7, and she kept it. I learned that she drank her coffee black in the morning and switched to tea somewhere after 2 in the afternoon, and that if you brought her the wrong thing at the wrong time, she wouldn't say anything, but she also wouldn't drink it. I learned that she had a habit of pressing her thumb against the edge of her desk when she was thinking through something difficult, and that when she laughed, which wasn't often, in meetings, but happened more easily in small groups, one-on-one, it was a real laugh. Unreserved. Like it came from somewhere she hadn't decided to lock up. I cataloged these things without meaning to. I filed them somewhere I didn't officially acknowledge. And I kept doing my job, efficiently, and without complaint, and told myself that what I felt when I walked into a room she was already in was simply heightened focus. That was the lie I was most proud of. It was very convincing. I told it to myself for almost 2 years. I should be honest about when it started to crack. It was an ordinary Wednesday. 11 months into Fabi's tenure. 7 months into what I had carefully classified as a productive professional relationship. We had stayed late to go over the vendor restructuring I'd been managing. Just the two of us, the rest of the floor already dark, the kind of quiet that only settles in an office building after everyone else has gone home. She was at the end of the conference table. I was at the other end. There were papers between us, and laptops, and 2 empty coffee cups that had been full at the beginning of the meeting. At some point, she had taken off her jacket. It was draped over the back of her chair, and rolled up one sleeve slightly, and I remember that I looked at that, and then looked immediately away, and that looking immediately away took more effort than it should have. Nothing happened. We worked. She made a few changes to my proposal that I didn't entirely agree with, and I said so. And she considered it, and then modified her position. And that was... It was a good meeting. It was the kind of working relationship I had always wanted to have with someone. When we were finally done, it was almost 9:30. She closed her laptop, stretched slightly, and then, in a tone that was conversational and light and gave absolutely nothing away, she said, "You're easier to work with than most people, Karen." I said, "Thank you." She said, "That wasn't a compliment exactly. It was an observation. Most people perform even when they think they're not performing. You stop when the work is in front of you." I didn't know what to do with that. I said, "I'll take it." She smiled. It was brief. And then she picked up her jacket and said goodnight, and I watched her leave, and I sat there in that empty conference room for probably 4 minutes longer than I had any reason to, and I thought, I am in trouble. I went home. I poured a glass of wine I didn't drink. I stood at my kitchen window and watched the street below, and made a very deliberate list of all the reasons why what I was feeling was categorically not what I was feeling. 1. She was my CEO. 2. She was my CEO. 3. There were professional consequences I was not willing to risk. 4. I had never. This was not the kind of thing that happened to me. The fourth one was the most revealing, actually. Not because it was the most important reason, because it was the most honest. I had dated over the years. I had had 2 relationships that lasted longer than a year, both with women, both of which ended not dramatically, but with a kind of mutual, exhausted recognition that we were trying to fit ourselves into something that didn't quite fit. The last one had been almost 3 years ago. Since then, I had been very successfully alone, which I had reframed as being very successfully focused. The thing about Fabi was that she didn't fit into any of the categories I had used for other people. She wasn't a colleague I could keep at professional distance. We worked too closely. She wasn't someone I could limit to a contained compartment of my life. And she wasn't someone I could easily dismiss, because dismissing her would have required me to stop seeing her clearly, and I had never been able to do that. She was just there, constant, in my peripheral vision on the good days, and directly in front of me on the harder ones. I made a decision that night, at my kitchen window, with the untouched wine in my hand. I was going to be careful. I was going to be professional. I was going to be exactly who I had always been at work, which was competent and self-contained and impossible to rattle. And I was not going to write anything down, because writing things down made them real in a way that thinking them didn't. I lasted about 3 weeks before I broke that rule. The letter wasn't planned. That's what I tell myself, and it's true. It wasn't a decision. It was a Tuesday evening, much later in the year, and I had just come back from a client dinner that had run 3 hours too long, and I was tired and slightly loose from 1 glass of wine too many, and I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop meaning to clear my inbox before bed. Instead, I opened a blank document, and I wrote to her. I didn't use her name at first. I just wrote, because the wine made it easier to pretend I was writing to no one, to a person who didn't exist, to the idea of her rather than the reality. I wrote about the conference room in November. I wrote about the way she'd said my name in a meeting 2 weeks before. Just my name, calling on me, nothing in it, and how I had heard the whole sentence before she finished it because I had memorized the pattern of how she spoke. I wrote about how I had started taking slightly longer routes through the office when I knew she was working late, and then started taking shorter ones when I realized I was doing it, and how neither the longer nor the shorter routes had solved anything. I wrote for about 40 minutes. At the end, I typed her name at the top, Fabi. And then I sat there looking at it for a long time. I didn't send it. Of course I didn't send it. I was reckless with my feelings sometimes, but I had always had enough sense not to act on them before I understood them. And this was not the kind of thing a person sent. This was the kind of thing a person wrote at midnight when they were tired, and slightly not themselves, and then closed, and then filed somewhere they wouldn't stumble across it on an ordinary afternoon. Or so I thought. I printed it instead of saving it. I don't know why. Some impulse I didn't examine. I put it in an envelope, wrote her name on the front, and then I put it in the storage cabinet in the corner of my office, behind the contracts and the insurance documents and Claire's birthday card. And I went back to being careful. For 3 years, I was careful. Careful became its own kind of habit. It became the shape of every interaction we had, every meeting, every late night, every moment when she said something that made me want to say something back that I wasn't allowed to say. I was professional. I was composed. I was, as far as anyone watching from the outside could tell, a very good director of operations who had a productive and appropriately boundaried working relationship with her CEO. The only thing wrong with that picture was that it was constructed entirely around one person. Everything I did well at work, I did partly because she would see it. Every standard I held partly because she had said it. Every morning I arrived early. I arrived with the awareness that she was probably already there, and that the particular quality of an early morning office, the quiet, the light, the absence of performance, was when I felt most myself around her. I was careful. I was so careful. And then, on a Tuesday afternoon 3 years later, I found the letter in the bottom of a storage drawer with the seal still intact, and I realized that careful had been the wrong word all along. Careful would have been burning it. I put the envelope back in the drawer. Then I took it out again. I stood there in my office. Door closed. Afternoon light falling at that particular autumn angle that always made the room feel like something was ending. And I looked at my own handwriting on the front of that envelope, and I tried to remember exactly how reckless I had been 3 years ago. Pretty reckless, it turned out. Because here was the thing I had forgotten, or chosen not to remember. I hadn't sealed it the night I wrote it. I had sealed it later. The night I sealed it, a Thursday. 2 days after writing it, Fabi had stopped by my office near the end of the day to go over a scheduling conflict. It was a brief conversation, maybe 10 minutes. But at one point she had picked up a pen from my desk to make a note, and when she set it down, her hand had brushed against mine, and I had felt something so disproportionate to the contact that it had alarmed me. I had sealed the letter that night and filed it in the drawer and told myself, "This is done. This is contained. You are not going to do anything about this, and the only reason this letter exists is because you needed to say it somewhere. And now you've said it. And now it's over." For 3 years it was over, until it wasn't. That Tuesday, standing in my office with the envelope in my hands, I had a very clear choice. I could put it through the shredder. It would take 30 seconds. It would be tidy and final, and it would match the person I had worked very hard to be for the last 3 years. I put it in my bag instead. I'm still not entirely sure why. Something in me, the same part that had printed it instead of deleting it, that had sealed it instead of burning it, that had kept it in a drawer for 3 years instead of throwing it away, that part had decided something I hadn't consciously caught up to yet. I carried it home. I put it on my kitchen table. I made dinner. I ate. I watched 40 minutes of something I couldn't tell you the name of now. And the whole time, the envelope sat on the table, and I did not open it. Because opening it would mean reading it, and reading it would mean feeling everything I had carefully organized into a quiet, manageable drawer for 3 years. At 11:30, I turned off the TV and sat at the kitchen table. I opened the envelope. What I had written 3 years ago was, I had to stop twice while reading it. Not because it was dramatic. It wasn't. It was honest in the specific, uncomfortable way that only comes out when you're tired and slightly not yourself and writing to someone you're never going to send the letter to. I had written about her voice in meetings, about the specific way she listened when someone said something she genuinely hadn't considered, a slight tilt of the head, a brief pause before responding, about the evening in November in the conference room, and what I had thought about afterward, and how I had made a list of reasons, and how the list had failed completely at its job. I had written, I don't know what to do with this, so I'm writing it down, and maybe that's enough. Maybe knowing I said it somewhere, even to no one, is the thing that lets me stop carrying it so heavily. I read that last line 3 times, and I thought, it wasn't enough, because I was still carrying it, just quieter. The next morning, Fabi called me into her office. This was not unusual. We met often. The nature of my role meant that I was in her office regularly, for strategy reviews, operational updates, schedule conflicts. I went in with my notebook and my coffee and my very reliable composure, exactly as I always did. She was standing at the window when I came in. She did that sometimes, held meetings standing, moving, like she thought better when she wasn't fixed to a desk. She turned when she heard me, and she said, "Close the door." I closed it. She said, "I want to ask you about something, and I want you to tell me the truth." I said, "Okay." And then she reached into the top drawer of her desk and set an envelope on the surface between us. Cream-colored, slightly worn at the edges. Her name, in my handwriting, on the front. The room went very quiet. Or maybe it had been quiet the whole time and I had only just noticed. She said, "I found this 2 years ago. In your office." I did not move. She said, "You'd asked me to pull a file from the storage cabinet while you were on a call. I opened the wrong drawer. This was at the back of it." I had a very precise memory suddenly of a morning 2 years ago when I had been on a call with a vendor that ran long, and I had waved Fabi toward the storage cabinet and mouthed the folder name at her. And she had nodded, and I had kept talking, and I had not thought about the bottom drawer, because I never thought about the bottom drawer. She said, "I didn't open it." I said, "Okay." She said, "I should have put it back. I know that. I should have left it where I found it and not thought about it again. But," I said, my voice was doing something that wasn't quite steady. "But I kept it," she said. "I took it because I recognized your handwriting and my name, and I kept it because I didn't know what to do with it. And then 2 years went by and I still hadn't opened it, and I still hadn't given it back." I stared at the envelope on her desk. I said, "Why are you telling me this now?" She said, "Because this morning you came in looking like someone who had finally figured something out. And it was the same look you had 3 years ago on the Wednesday in November, after we worked late. And I've been waiting for you to say something since then." The silence in that office was very large. I said, "You've been waiting?" "Yes," she said, "for 3 years." "Yes." I looked at her. She was standing very still by her desk, and her face was not composed exactly. She looked like someone who had finally put something heavy down, not relieved, not victorious. Just lighter than she'd been before she'd started talking. I said, "You could have said something." She said, "So could you." That was the most honest conversation we'd had in 7 years of working together, and it landed on me like something falling from a very great height, because I had been so certain, so constructed in my certainty, that the distance between us was mine to manage, my feeling, my problem, my carefully folded letter in my carefully maintained drawer. I had never, not once, allowed myself to consider that the distance might be something she was managing too. I sat down, not because she asked me to, because my legs had made a decision without consulting the rest of me. She sat across from me. She left the envelope between us, and I looked at her. Really looked at her. Without the professional layer, without the careful management of how much I was allowed to see. And I thought, she kept it. For 2 years she kept it without reading it. Without asking about it. Without making it into something I would have had to respond to before I was ready. She had found it, and she had held on to it, and she had waited. I had spent 3 years being careful. She had spent 2 years being patient. And I had no idea what to do with that. I had no category for it. Every version of this story that I had ever run in the back of my mind, the fantasies I mostly tried not to have, the contingencies I never thought through because thinking them through would have made them real, none of them had included her doing this. None of them had included her being afraid of something too. That was what I hadn't seen. That was the thing I had missed. But before we continue, if you've made it this far, it's because something in this story already feels familiar to you. That particular weight of saying nothing for so long that the silence becomes its own kind of statement. So do me a favor. Click the like button right now. It costs you nothing, and it helps me keep bringing stories like this to you. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe and hit the notification bell, so YouTube lets you know when the next one drops. Now I want to know something from you. In the comments, tell me, have you ever found out that someone had been waiting for you and you had no idea? That they had been on the other side of a distance you thought was only yours to carry? Type it for me. I read every single one. And tell me, where in the world are you watching from? I'll heart every city, now. Back to Karen. We sat in her office for a long time without saying anything. I had a notebook in my hands that I had stopped pretending to need. The envelope was still on the desk between us. At some point, without discussion, we had arrived at an understanding that neither of us was going to open it right now, that whatever was in it had waited long enough, and that what was happening in this room was already more than the letter. Finally, I said, "I thought you didn't know." She said, "I know. I thought I was..." I stopped. Started again. "I thought I was the one carrying it." "I know," she said again, and her voice was very quiet. Not soft, exactly. Just stripped of the register she used when she was running a meeting or making a decision. The register I heard almost never, and recognized as real when I did. I said, "That's not fair." She looked at me. "What isn't?" "That you could see everything and say nothing. That you could just wait, while I was over there managing it." She didn't answer immediately. She pressed her thumb against the edge of the desk. That gesture I had catalogued 3 years ago and never forgotten, and she said, "It wouldn't have been fair for me to say something. You had to be the one to decide." "Why?" "Because you were the one who wasn't sure yet." I opened my mouth, closed it. She said carefully, "I'm not saying I was certain. I'm saying I knew what I felt sooner than you did, and I didn't think it was mine to push. Whatever you were figuring out, about this, about yourself, that was yours. I thought about the 3 years, the careful mornings, the managed distances, the routes through the office I had adjusted and readjusted, the list of reasons I had made at my kitchen window that had not survived contact with even one evening of her being honest with me. I thought about the letter in the sealed envelope, sitting on the desk between us, still unopened. I said, "Did you ever want to read it?" She said, "Every day." That broke something open in me that I had been holding closed for a very long time. Not dramatically. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything that would have made a good speech. I just sat there and felt something loosen in my chest and let it loosen and didn't immediately try to gather it back into something manageable. I said, "I've been so careful." She said, "I noticed. I thought careful was the right thing." "Careful kept you safe," she said. "It wasn't wrong. It was just... it wasn't the only thing." I looked at her across the desk and I thought about all the things I had decided not to say. All the moments I had filed under professional appropriateness and reasonable discretion, and this is not who I am at work. All the times I had told myself that what I felt was a problem to solve, rather than a truth to acknowledge. And I thought about the letter. About having written it in 40 minutes on a Tuesday night, and then spent 3 years pretending I hadn't needed to. I said, "I think I've been running a version of this in my head where I was the only one with something to lose." She said, "You weren't. I see that now." "Good," she said. And then after a pause, "Karen. Just my name." The way she said it in that specific register, not the meeting register, not the decision register, the one I heard almost never. I looked at her. She said, "What do you want to do?" And here was the thing. Here was the thing that I had not understood, that I think I had been protecting myself from understanding for 3 years. I had always known what I wanted. I had just never let myself believe it was a choice I was allowed to make. I had built an entire architecture of caution around a feeling that wasn't actually dangerous. It was just big and unfamiliar. And it required me to step out of the self I had carefully constructed and admit that the self underneath was different from the one on the surface. That the woman who arrived early and managed timelines and never missed a detail had also been quietly, consistently, undeniably falling in love with the person she worked most closely with for 7 years. I had treated that like a liability. She had treated it like something worth waiting for. I looked at the envelope on the desk. I said, "Open it." She didn't move. I said, "I want you to read it. I want you to know what I wrote then because that's where it started for me. And I don't want to start now without you having that." She reached for the envelope. She opened it with the particular care of someone handling something that has waited a long time to be handled. She unfolded the pages, 2 of them. I had forgotten there were 2. And she read. I watched her face while she read. I had catalogued this face for 7 years. I knew the slight furrow when she was working through a problem. I knew the tightening at the corners when something didn't add up. I knew the exact look of her concentration, her skepticism, her amusement, her patience. I had never seen this before. What I saw on her face while she read my letter was the expression of someone who had suspected something for a very long time, and was now, quietly and without fanfare, being proved right. Not triumphant, not vindicated, just arrived. She read to the end. She folded the pages. She placed them gently back in the envelope. She looked at me. She said, "You said you didn't know what to do with it." "I didn't," I said. "Then." "And now?" I said, "Now I think I know that not knowing was never the problem. The problem was that I decided not knowing meant I should wait." She said, "Wait for what?" I said, "For certainty, for the right moment, for some condition to be met that I never actually defined." She said, "And?" I said, "And there is no condition. There was never a condition. There was just me being afraid of the size of it." The afternoon had gone a particular shade of gold outside her office window. The city below was full of its ordinary sounds. In here, everything was very still. She said, "I'm afraid of it too." "I know," I said. "I can see that now. I wasn't sure you could. I should have been paying better attention." She almost smiled. "You were paying extraordinary attention to everything except the parts you'd decided not to look at." That was accurate. That was so precisely accurate that I didn't try to contest it. I said, "I'm looking now." She said, "I can see that." And then neither of us said anything for a moment. We just sat there, in the particular silence that exists between 2 people who have finally said the thing, not perfectly, not elegantly, but truly, and are letting it settle. I had thought for 3 years that the distance between us was mine to manage. I had thought I was the one keeping things steady, the one holding the weight of it so that nothing would tip. I had not understood, not until this exact moment, that the steadiness had been mutual, that she had been holding her side of it as carefully as I had been holding mine, that the distance I had experienced as discipline had also been, on her end, restraint. That was the inversion I hadn't seen coming. I had spent 7 years believing that I was the uncertain one, the one still figuring something out, the one who needed more time, more safety, more evidence before she could commit to anything beyond the careful version of herself she'd built. And she had let me believe that. Not to deceive me, because she understood that the discovering had to be mine. She had been the steady one all along. Not because she was invulnerable or without fear, but because she had known, had decided, that whatever this was, it was worth the patience it required. I was the one who had needed rescuing from my own caution. And she had been there the whole time, holding the letter I thought no one would ever read, waiting for me to catch up to the version of myself that had written it. She stood up first. She came around the desk, not quickly, not dramatically, just that deliberate way she had of moving when she had made a decision and was following it through. She stopped a few feet from me, and she held out the envelope. I took it. She said, "You should keep this." I said, "Why?" She said, "Because I've been keeping it for 2 years, and now it's your turn." I looked at the envelope in my hands, my handwriting, her name. I said, "I spent 3 years being careful with it." She said, "I know. You can stop now." Something moved in my chest when she said that. Not a sharp thing, not a sudden thing, just a long, slow release. Like a breath I hadn't known I'd been holding since a Tuesday night 3 years ago, when I'd sat at a kitchen table and written down everything I wasn't supposed to feel. I looked up at her. She was watching me with that particular steadiness, the one that had always felt like clarity from a distance and felt like something else entirely this close. She wasn't performing calm. She was actually calm, in the specific way of someone who has been waiting for something long enough that its arrival doesn't feel like surprise anymore. It feels like recognition. I said, "I thought you didn't need anything from me." She said, "I know you did. I thought you were—" "I know what you thought," she said. "That I had everything sorted. That I was the one with the clear head and the good answers and the patience that didn't cost me anything." "Didn't it?" she said. "It cost me everything. I just didn't show you the bill." I thought about the version of her I had constructed over 7 years. Competent, exacting, composed. The woman who ran the meeting and set the standard and asked the right questions. The woman I had quietly, carefully, completely organized my entire working life around, without ever admitting that was what I was doing. I had seen her precisely. I had not seen her fully. The woman standing in front of me right now. The one who had kept a sealed envelope for 2 years, and chosen patience over pressure and waited for me to decide without ever making me feel the weight of the waiting. That woman was not the version I had studied. That woman was the real one. And I had been so busy being the uncertain one, the still figuring it out one, the one who needed more time and more safety and more proof. I had never stopped to ask what it cost her to be the certain one, the patient one, the one who waited. She said quietly, "Karen." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm not asking you for anything. I want you to know that. Whatever happens next, I'm not putting a condition on it." "That's not fair either," I said. She said, "Why not?" I said, "Because I've already made you wait long enough." She looked at me. I said, "I'm not going to make you wait anymore." I held out the envelope. She looked at it and then back at me. I said, "I want you to have it back." She didn't take it immediately. She said, "You sure?" I said, "I'm sure." And that was the truest thing I had said in 3 years. Not because I suddenly had all the certainty I'd spent 3 years hunting, but because I had finally understood that certainty was never the thing I'd been missing. What I'd been missing was the willingness to be seen without knowing exactly how I looked. She took the envelope. Her hand closed over it, and over my hand for just a moment, warm and still and completely intentional. And then she held it, and I didn't. And something passed between us in that 30 seconds that would have taken me 3 paragraphs to describe, and that she understood without a word. She had always been better at reading the unspoken than I was. I sat there in the gold afternoon light and understood, slowly, in layers, the way understanding actually arrives, and not the way I had always wished it would. That the woman I had believed was the strong one was also the woman who had been afraid. That the patience I had experienced as distance was also the patience of someone who had too much respect for my process to rush it. That I had not been carrying the weight alone. That I had never been carrying it alone. I had just been so focused on my end of it that I'd forgotten to look up and see who was holding the other side. I finally had what I had spent 3 years trying not to want. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't certain. It was two women in an office on a Tuesday afternoon with a letter between them that had taken 3 years and 2 people's silence to become something we could both hold. But it was true. And sometimes, the bravest thing isn't the grand gesture or the perfect speech. Sometimes the bravest thing is simply deciding to stop running from the version of yourself who already knew. If this story touched something in you, something you recognize, write Discovery in the comments. That way I know you made it all the way here with me. And if you want to stay in this space, where the stories are real and the feelings are allowed, click on the video that's showing on your screen right now. Thank you for being here. Until the next story, take good care of yourself.